Your $3,500 high-efficiency wood stove is the expensive lie. You're burning through 80 pounds of wood daily, feeding it every 4 hours like a hungry beast, and still waking up to a cold house on frigid mornings. Meanwhile, in 1750s Russia, peasant families heated their entire homes for 24 straight hours using just 18 pounds of birch and a single 3-hour fire. Their crude fieldstone stoves, built with river clay and hand tools, delivered steady 200-degree heat while your certified modern marvel cycles between scalding and useless. When contemporary thermal engineers first heard these claims, they dismissed them as thermodynamically impossible. Peasant exaggeration, unverified folklore. Then they started finding these ancient stoves still working perfectly in abandoned homesteads, and their testing equipment confirmed every impossible number. What did illiterate Russian stove builders understand about capturing heat that our credentialed engineers have completely forgotten? The answer will make you question everything you thought you knew about heating your home. Your $3,500 high-efficiency wood stove is failing you, and you know it. Every morning you wake up to a house that's lost its heat, the expensive cast iron already cold to the touch. The manufacturer promised 70% combustion efficiency, but efficiency means nothing when you're feeding this hungry beast every 4 to 6 hours like clockwork. 80 pounds of seasoned hardwood vanishes into that firebox daily, and still you're losing the battle against winter's bite. The surface thermometer reads 800 degrees during the burn, then plummets to useless within hours. You're spending more on cordwood than some people pay for their monthly heating bills, and your back aches from the constant loading, the endless splitting, the middle-of-the-night trudges to keep the fire alive. 300 years ago, in the depths of a Russian winter, where temperatures regularly dropped to 40 below zero, peasant families were solving this exact problem with nothing but fieldstone and river clay. Their solution was so elegant, so perfectly engineered, that modern thermal experts initially dismissed it as impossible folklore. A typical Russian masonry stove weighed 4,000 pounds and stood like a monument in the center of the home. Every morning, the family would build a single fire in its combustion chamber, burning perhaps 18 pounds of birch over 3 hours of active feeding. Then they would close the dampers and walk away. For the next 24 hours, that massive stone structure would maintain their home at a steady 68 degrees. The surface temperature held at exactly 200 degrees through the entire day and well into the night. Children could press their backs against the warm stone walls before bed and wake up to the same gentle heat the next morning. One fire, 18 pounds of wood, 24 hours of consistent warmth that never wavered, never demanded attention, never left anyone shivering in the dark hours before dawn. When contemporary heating engineers first encountered these claims, they reached for their calculators and shook their heads. The mathematics appeared impossible. Modern high-efficiency stoves, with all their sophisticated engineering and certified testing, couldn't approach such performance. A cast iron stove might burn hot, but thermal mass was minimal. Heat flew up the chimney and disappeared into the night sky. These engineers knew their combustion science, their BTU calculations, their thermal coefficients. Russian peasants burning less fuel for longer heat retention simply violated the laws of physics as they understood them. But the laws hadn't changed. The understanding had been lost. Those peasant builders, dismissed as backward and primitive by educated European visitors, had discovered principles that wouldn't appear in engineering textbooks for another century. They had learned to capture heat that modern stoves simply throw away. Every BTU that escaped up a conventional chimney at 500 degrees represented wasted energy, money burned for no purpose. The Russians had solved this waste through systematic observation, brutal trial and error, and the kind of generational thinking that builds solutions meant to last centuries, not seasons. The impossible numbers weren't folklore. They were engineering, and somewhere between the rush to market and the pursuit of quick profits, that engineering had been forgotten, replaced by products that promised efficiency while delivering dependence, that claimed innovation while ignoring the thermal principles their ancestors had mastered with stone and clay, and the patience to build once, build right, and never build again. In the winter of 1750, survival in the Russian territories meant solving the heating problem with whatever materials lay within walking distance of your cabin. There were no lumber yards, no hardware stores, no certified installers with warranties and service calls. The nearest town might be 50 miles through forests that could swallow a man in a blizzard. Families faced 7 to 8 months of heating season, where temperatures commonly dropped to 40 below zero, and they had perhaps 15 to 20 cords of firewood, maximum to last the entire winter. Waste a single BTU through poor design, and children might freeze before spring thaw. These weren't the romantic log cabins of frontier mythology. Russian peasant homes were functional structures built by people who understood that failure meant death, not just discomfort. The stove builders who served these communities learned their craft through apprenticeships that lasted 7 to 10 years, not weekend workshops or certification courses. A master craftsman like Pyotr from the Novgorod region represented 3 generations of accumulated knowledge, passed down through direct observation, systematic testing, and the kind of brutal feedback that only life or death situations provide. When European architects and engineers visited these territories, they dismissed what they saw as primitive waste. Why build a stove that weighed 2 tons when a lightweight iron box could produce the same heat? Why spend weeks constructing elaborate masonry systems when manufactured products could be installed in hours? These educated visitors saw the heavy construction, the labor-intensive processes, the apparent overbuilding, and concluded that Russian peasants simply didn't understand efficiency or economy. They were looking at the wrong metrics entirely. The Russian stove builders had discovered something that wouldn't appear in thermodynamics textbooks for another century. They understood combustion as a 3-stage process, not the single burn that modern stoves attempt. Their primary burn chamber operated at 1800 degrees, creating the initial combustion. But instead of sending those hot gases straight up a chimney, they forced them through a secondary chamber at 1200 degrees, where remaining combustible gases burned completely. Finally, those gases traveled through a heat exchange maze where temperatures dropped to 600 degrees before any heat was allowed to escape the system. This wasn't accidental engineering. Master builders calculated thermal mass ratios by hand and eye, selecting specific stones for their heat capacity and arranging them in precise patterns. They mixed clay mortar using exact ratios of river clay, sand, and chopped straw that would expand and contract with thermal cycling without cracking over decades of use. They understood that rapid heat storage during the active fire was only half the solution. The real engineering lay in the controlled release of that stored energy over 18 to 24 hours through calculated thermal conductivity. While European visitors focused on the time and labor required for construction, they missed the fundamental principle. Russian stove builders weren't building heating appliances. They were creating thermal batteries that charged once per day and discharged slowly, steadily, efficiently throughout the heating cycle. Their apprentices learned to read stone like modern engineers read blueprints, understanding which granite held heat longest, which sandstone transferred warmth most evenly, which clay compositions sealed joints without restricting thermal expansion. These men worked with materials that cost virtually nothing but required everything in terms of knowledge and skill. They built systems that their great-grandchildren would still be using, heating homes that would stand for centuries. European efficiency meant quick construction and immediate heat. Russian efficiency meant building once, building correctly, and never having to rebuild again. The Russian breakthrough came from a simple but revolutionary understanding. Heat was far too valuable a resource to waste. Every BTU represented precious fuel that families had split, hauled, and stacked through backbreaking summer labor. While modern chimneys shoot 70% of combustion heat straight up into the sky at temperatures between 400 and 600 degrees, Russian stove builders designed their systems around a fundamental principle of capture and retention. Nothing escaped until it had surrendered every possible unit of thermal energy. Their solution was the serpentine flue system, a thermal labyrinth that forced hot combustion gases through 15 to 20 feet of masonry channels before allowing any heat to escape through the chimney. Where modern stoves use straight pipes that create a direct highway for heat loss, Russian builders created obstacles, barriers, and heat exchange surfaces that extracted energy through every possible method. The hot gases had no choice but to travel through this maze, transferring their heat through conduction into the massive stone walls, through convection as they swirled through calculated chambers, and through radiation as they contacted hundreds of square feet of internal masonry surface. The engineering precision required to make this system function reveals the sophisticated understanding these builders possessed. Each flue channel measured exactly 6 to 8 inches square, sized to maintain optimal gas flow rates without creating backdraft or incomplete combustion. Too large, and the gases would rush through without sufficient heat transfer. Too small, and dangerous carbon monoxide could back up into living spaces. The total path length through the internal channels stretched 15 to 20 feet, creating between 200 and 300 square feet of heat exchange surface area within the masonry mass. Construction of these systems required 3 to 4 weeks of intensive labor, using nothing but hand tools, but the thermal efficiency achieved was extraordinary. Where modern high-efficiency stoves capture perhaps 30 to 40% of combustion heat, Russian masonry systems achieved 90 to 95% heat capture. Exhaust gases finally escaped through the chimney at temperatures between 200 and 250 degrees, meaning virtually all useful heat had been extracted and stored within the thermal mass. The contrast with contemporary heating systems reveals just how much engineering knowledge has been abandoned in favor of manufacturing convenience. Your modern wood stove essentially functions as an expensive campfire in a metal box. Combustion occurs in a single chamber. Hot gases rush directly up a straight chimney, and the thin metal walls radiate heat briefly before cooling to ambient temperature. The chimney thermometer might read 500 degrees during active burning, representing hundreds of dollars worth of wasted fuel energy, shooting directly into the winter sky. Russian builders understood that working against natural thermal laws was futile and expensive. Instead of fighting heat's tendency to rise and escape, they channeled that natural movement through calculated pathways that served their purposes. The ascending hot gases wanted to move upward, so the flue system guided that movement through maximum contact with thermal mass before allowing escape. They designed with physics, not against it, creating systems that captured the natural energy of combustion and stored it for gradual, controlled release. The mathematical elegance of their solution becomes clear when measured against modern performance. Contemporary stoves require constant feeding because they have no significant thermal storage capacity. The moment active combustion stops, heat output drops dramatically. Russian systems front-loaded the energy input during a brief, intense burning period, then distributed that captured energy steadily over 24 hours through the calculated thermal mass and internal heat exchange surfaces that modern engineering has largely forgotten how to build. The master principle behind Russian masonry stove engineering was transforming 4,000 pounds of carefully selected stone into a massive thermal battery that charged once daily and powered home heating for the next 24 hours. While modern thin-walled stoves immediately radiate their heat and then cool to useless cold metal within hours, Russian builders understood that thermal mass was the key to energy storage and controlled release. They weren't just building heating appliances. They were creating thermal power plants that operated on a completely different principle than anything we use today. The engineering calculations required to make this system function reveal mathematical sophistication that would impress contemporary thermal engineers. 4,000 pounds of granite and sandstone, arranged in walls 8 to 12 inches thick, could store over 300,000 BTUs from a single firing. But storage was only half the equation. The real genius lay in the controlled release of that energy through precisely calculated thermal conductivity. The wall thickness wasn't arbitrary. 8 inches provided optimal thermal lag, ensuring that heat absorbed during the morning fire wouldn't reach the outer surface until evening, then continue radiating steadily throughout the night. Stone selection followed principles that modern builders have largely forgotten. Russian craftsmen chose materials based on specific heat capacity rather than appearance or convenience. Dense granite held heat longest, but released it slowly. Sandstone transferred warmth more quickly, but with less total storage. Master builders combined different stones in calculated patterns, creating thermal gradients that managed heat release over extended periods. They understood that different minerals responded differently to heating and cooling cycles, and they used those properties to engineer specific performance characteristics. The daily rhythm of Russian masonry stove operation created a completely different relationship with heating than modern systems demand. Families began each day with a fire-building ritual that lasted approximately 3 hours. 18 pounds of seasoned birch burned in the primary chamber while family members went about morning tasks. By mid-morning, the dampers closed and the active heating phase ended. But this was when the real heating began. The massive thermal mass had absorbed hundreds of thousands of BTUs, and now began its slow, steady release through 40 to 60 square feet of radiating surface. Surface temperatures held at exactly 200 to 220 degrees throughout the day and well into the night. Children could lean against the warm stone walls during afternoon lessons and find the same gentle heat available at bedtime. Parents never worried about middle-of-the-night temperature drops or early morning cold snaps. The thermal battery discharged its stored energy at a rate perfectly matched to heat loss through the building envelope, maintaining steady interior temperatures for 18 to 24 hours without any additional fuel input or human attention. The contrast with modern heating systems reveals how far thermal engineering has regressed in pursuit of manufacturing convenience. Contemporary wood stoves offer zero thermal storage capacity. The moment combustion stops, heat output drops dramatically. Homeowners become servants to their heating systems, feeding them constantly, adjusting dampers, monitoring temperatures, splitting endless quantities of cordwood to maintain basic comfort. The stove owns the family's schedule rather than serving it. Russian families invested their energy once per day during the morning fire, then enjoyed complete freedom for the remaining 24 hours. Their heating system required no attention, no midnight feeding, no constant monitoring. 18 pounds of wood provided the same heating capacity that modern stoves achieve with 80 pounds of fuel and delivered it more consistently, more reliably, and with far less human labor. The thermal battery principle transformed heating from a constant chore into a daily ritual that powered comfortable living through the Russian winter with an elegance that modern engineering has somehow managed to forget entirely. In 2018, a mason named David was renovating an abandoned farmstead in rural Vermont when he discovered something that would challenge everything modern heating engineers thought they knew about thermal efficiency. Behind decades of accumulated debris stood a Russian masonry stove built sometime in the 1820s by immigrant settlers. The structure had endured nearly 2 centuries of New England winters without maintenance, its massive fieldstone construction still solid and intact. Rather than dismissing it as historical curiosity, David decided to test its performance using modern measuring equipment. The results defied contemporary engineering wisdom. Independent thermal testing confirmed every impossible claim that experts had dismissed as peasant folklore. 18 pounds of seasoned hardwood burned during a 3-hour morning fire maintained interior temperatures at 68 degrees for 24 straight hours. Surface temperatures held steady at 200 degrees throughout the entire heating cycle. Most remarkably, exhaust gases escaped at just 250 degrees, confirming that over 90% of combustion heat was being captured and stored within the thermal mass. Word of these measurements spread through heating industry circles, creating considerable skepticism among engineers who understood that such performance violated accepted thermal coefficients. But as more abandoned Russian stoves were discovered and tested throughout New England and the upper Midwest, the pattern repeated consistently. Systems that had operated flawlessly for 150 to 200 years were still delivering fuel efficiency that modern high-efficiency stoves couldn't approach. The mathematical impossibility was proving mathematically correct. The heating industry responded predictably. Rather than admitting that traditional knowledge had surpassed contemporary engineering, manufacturers began incorporating Russian thermal mass principles into premium products marketed as cutting-edge sustainable technology. Modern masonry heaters, built using the same serpentine flue systems and thermal battery principles that Russian peasants had perfected 3 centuries earlier, now command prices between $8,000 and $15,000 installed. The same heating performance that cost $200 worth of fieldstone and clay in 1750 was being repackaged as luxury home technology for the environmentally conscious wealthy. Independent testing laboratories began documenting performance specifications that vindicated every claim the experts had rejected. Contemporary masonry heaters achieved 75 to 85% reductions in wood consumption compared to conventional stoves. Emissions testing showed 60 to 70% reductions in particulate matter due to the complete combustion achieved in properly designed systems. Most significantly, fuel efficiency measurements confirmed that these systems delivered the same heating capacity as modern stoves while consuming one-fourth the cordwood. The masonry heater industry now experiences 15% annual growth as homeowners discover what Russian families knew instinctively: building once, building correctly, and building for centuries rather than decades creates heating systems that serve families rather than enslaving them. Contemporary installations require no electricity, no moving parts, no maintenance schedules, and no planned obsolescence. They heat homes the same way they heated peasant cabins, through thermal principles that work with natural laws rather than fighting them. The vindication was complete, but it came with bitter irony. The primitive technology that educated Europeans had dismissed as wasteful inefficiency was now being marketed as advanced sustainable engineering. Russian stove builders had solved heating efficiency 300 years ago using materials they could gather from their own land. Modern families pay premium prices to rediscover what patient observation and generational thinking had created with fieldstone and clay. The forgotten wisdom hadn't been lost to time. It had been abandoned in favor of products that created dependence rather than solutions, that demanded constant attention rather than delivering reliable performance, that measured success in quarterly profits rather than multi-generational utility. The peasants had been right all along, they just hadn't owned the patents.